Good morning, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. I am obviously not in my Portland, Oregon permaculture garden in Zone 9A. I am in Little River, California at the Andiron Inn. I don't actually know what garden zone we're in, but I want to talk today about a couple of really nerdy niche permaculture concepts. And I hope that it will be helpful for you. I hope that it will be educational and informative and that you can fold some of these concepts both from permaculture design and from nature, because permaculture borrows from, gleans from, learns from Mother Nature. I hope you can fold those into your garden design. Now, before we get into the video, please make sure that you click like and that you are subscribed to this channel. So yeah, my husband and I are in Mendocino County looking at property, but we also took some time to go on some of our favorite hikes down here. And one of those is Van Dam Park, which takes you up the Little River. It's a beautiful, beautiful hike. And we've done it a couple of times. Now there's some gorgeous stumps of enormous, I think probably second growth redwoods. There is a very clear, it's called Little River, but it looks like a stream. And then also there's just tons and tons of, well, as I'm scratching here, tons of mosquitoes, but also tons of natives growing all along the path. So my understanding is that along Little River in the 30s, the Civilian Conservation Corps came in and helped put in paths and signage and create this really lovely usable space for folks to enjoy Little River, enjoy the nature there. So what does this have to do with our garden design? If we are out in nature hiking around, obviously that's not cultivation, that's not agriculture. Well, in permaculture, we are always looking to nature. That's why we have that principle, design from patterns to details. What are the patterns that exist in nature and how can we emulate them? How can we learn from the lessons of nature? So what are some of the lessons that we can learn here? What are some of the tips and design strategies that we can glean from nature? Well, one of the things I noticed along this hike was how all of the natives really stacked in this diverse polyculture. Now, what's a polyculture? A polyculture is when you have multiple culture, or cultivating multiple plants of different species, different varieties, all existing together in one location. It's so different than our modern industrial agricultural concept of a monoculture, where you have straight rows and you're growing all one crop, one variety of one crop. When you have a monoculture, you have a much greater risk. Your yield is at risk, right? In permaculture, we say design from patterns to details, but we also say obtain a yield. Your design has to produce a yield for you. It doesn't make any sense to put all of this input into your garden or into your farm and then not get a yield out of it. And so when you have monoculture, you have the risk of pests and diseases being able to hop freely from plant to plant. And you have all of your eggs in one basket. You're saying, I'm growing one variety, I'm growing Cavendish bananas, and that's it. I'm only growing one variety of banana, and that's all I've got, that monoculture. If a pest or disease comes through, it'll just blow through like wildfire. And you've lost your entire crop. You've put all your eggs in one basket. Nature doesn't typically work that way. There are some examples of monocultures in nature, but they are rare. And even then, you're looking at one dominant plant species, for example, bamboo forests, but there are still other organisms that live in that ecosystem. So what does a polyculture look like in nature? Well, let me give you an example from the trail yesterday. You have different plants that are growing at different levels. They are filling different niches in the ecosystem. And in permaculture, we talk about those layers that we want to plant in, right? So you could see that there was fringe cup and there was oxalis oregana. There were all of these very low growing herbaceous perennials that were occupying the ground cover layer. And then as you move up a little bit, you're getting things like stinging nettle that are a little bit taller. And then you move up a little bit more and you have thimbleberry, which is Rubus parviflorus, which is one of my favorite natives to plant. It's native here in California, also native in Oregon. And I'll talk about thimbleberry more in a little bit. But that's your kind of shrub layer. They're taller. They're not actually a shrub. They are a member of the raspberry family, but they do walk and form a patch, right? A clonal patch. But they're, 4 or 5 feet tall. Sometimes they can get as tall as 6 feet tall. But they really prefer that understory. They want some shade because what exists in that polyculture with them are those taller trees. You can have hazels, you can have elderberries, those kind of understory trees. And then you have the canopy trees, which on this walk was redwoods. And so they are creating that dominant shade. They're creating the canopy layer that allows that filtered, dappled sunlight to come down underneath. And that's what thimbleberries really, really love. So in a polyculture, you're acknowledging that you can grow a diversity of crops in one space because different crops like different growing conditions. The same way as in nature, you have these different microclimates, different circumstances as you move through the different layers that naturally exist. And so you get the evolution of different species that occupy those different niches. Well, why not replicate that in your garden? That is the basis of a polyculture. And the classic example of a polyculture in permaculture is a fruit tree guild. That is sort of the poster child for polyculture on a really small scale in your backyard. You have one fruit tree, which represents your canopy tree. It could be a nut tree as well. It could be a nut tree. It could be a hazelnut, or it could be something much larger like a heart nut or a walnut. And that will kind of occupy the same niche as the redwoods did on this trail. And then underneath, you might have your understory trees that might be like an elderberry. It might be a hazel, can also be an understory tree. And then you have your shrub layer under that, like the thimbleberries. In my garden, in my shade garden, that would be thimbleberries. In other fruit tree guilds, it would be blueberries or honeyberries. Any of those shrubs. Currants, European currants, another really good shrub layer plant, all producing different kinds of food for me, nuts and fruits and berries as well. And then you can move a little bit lower and you have, those other low growing herbaceous perennials. You can have your ground cover plants like strawberries or thyme. You can also have vining plants that vine up through. Now, we didn't really see very many vining plants on our walk yesterday. There were a couple that are invasive, so I won't touch on those. But in my garden, some examples of those vine layer plants would be hardy kiwis that scramble up, and they usually use the canopy tree as a sort of scaffold, as their own support, and they reach up for the sunlight. Grapes are another great example of a vining layer plant. And then you have all of the fungi in the soil, which can be edible, right? You're stacking in all of these different layers. And then in a polyculture, you might get a yield of food out of all of those, but you might also get a yield of medicine or fiber, right? Out of any of those plants that are growing there. They might also be an insectiary plant. How can you support nature and draw in those pollinators, provide forage for your pollinators? So many different aspects to a polyculture because you're seeking to represent, to not necessarily reconstruct, but to honor the patterns that exist in nature and say, there's something really good here. I can diversify and enhance my yield and increase my capacity for abundance. So on this walk, it just really struck me of like, when you are interfacing with nature and you are looking at everything around you through a permaculture lens, when you internalize and understand those 12 permaculture principles, then you are looking to nature to be a teacher, even when you don't mean for her to be so, right? You're just open to the possibilities. You're open to all of those different concepts, and you're using that first permaculture principle, observe and interact. And for me, so often, it's just observe and observe and observe some more. And I'm not interacting until much farther down the line. I'm taking notes, right? I'm taking notes, I'm collecting data points. So I would encourage you, if you are out in nature, how can you look to those 12 permaculture principles? How can you look for those patterns that exist so that you can design your garden from patterns to details? What are the ways that you can increase your resiliency? And I would also argue the beauty of your garden, because I don't know about you guys, but okay, there is some aesthetic value to straight rows of corn or straight rows of green beans. Yes, it's tidy and orderly. It takes a tremendous amount of maintenance, and I don't find it nearly as beautiful as a diverse polyculture where you have all of these different plants stacked in. There is that yield of the beauty of the aesthetics of your fruit tree guild, as well as all of the yields of nutrition and fiber and medicine that you can get out of them. Okay, now before we finish here, I do want to talk for just a moment about thimbleberries in particular, because I think that they are such a great example of how sometimes the yield that you get out of your garden is a little bit unexpected. And if you look to those kind of niche crops, you can add diversity in your diet and also resilience. So thimbleberries are never going to produce as well as raspberries. They are a native, shade tolerant, and I would argue shade loving raspberry. The fruit itself is very, very delicate. They'll never be a commercial crop. It is going to be smaller, seedier, and gosh, you pull that little thimbleberry off and the cup almost immediately collapses. But they're good to snack on as you are foraging. They're really good if you want to mix them in with other berries for jams and preserves, put them in a smoothie. That's how I enjoy them. They have like a really good, intense raspberry flavor. But you're never going to be able to get a significant caloric yield out of them. You will, however, create an area in your garden where the thimbleberries are providing a huge amount of forage for bumblebees. Thimbleberry flowers, beautiful, lovely. In my garden in particular, one of the bumblebees' favorite foods. Okay, there's also another yield, another benefit that you're going to get out of thimbleberries. They're really good at controlling erosion and securing the soil. So part of the reason that they thrive along this path is that when you have that edge, right? In permaculture, we say, what? Use the edges and value the marginal. You have that edge effect on the edge of the path where it meets the forest. You get that extra little bit of sunlight, you get that edge effect where you have two biomes or two different sets of conditions overlapping. Thimbleberries love that, particularly in areas with disturbance along the edge of the forest because they like shade, where the soil otherwise would be prone to erosion. You are able to secure the bank. You're able to secure the soil by having those thimbleberries come in and populate and put down their runners. So just a really good crop to consider if you are looking for if you're here in the Pacific Northwest or here in California, if you're looking for a native that can offer all of those different yields and also is really, really lovely and gives you something to grow underneath your canopy trees. Okay, and with that, we have to check out of our hotel. We are on the way back up north. We're going to pick up our daughter in Newport. Ruth is done with her summer studies out at the coast, and so we're going to make a little loop and go pick her up and head back home. But yeah, we have to go say goodbye to the goats here at the Andiron. I had a wonderful stay here. We've been down here a number of times, but this is the first time we've stayed here, and it's a really lovely property and a really nice location right south of Mendocino. And they have two goats, Coco and Peanut Butter. So we're going to go say goodbye to them, and I will be back very, very soon. I have tons to talk about from this trip, but that will have to wait until a little bit later. Maybe tonight on our hotel on the way back up, I'll have time. We'll see. Thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be back really soon. Thanks.